Welcome to Size of Thoughts, Conversations with the Alliance of History graduate students. My name is Jacob Glicklick. I'm the producer of this show. The things you will hear over the next hour represent the views of Size of Thoughts and the people making them. All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. Well, thanks for tuning in and joining us. For this week, we're going to be discussing aspects of lived historical presentation, the questions that people ask of the past, the questions they ask of historians, questions they ask of historians and people that work with history beyond the usual bounds of academia and teaching. So joining me for this week's discussion is returning guest Randy Miller.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. And first-time guest, Stephen Daly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, one of the ways that I want to launch off some of this discussion is talking with you, Steve, about the work that you do, particularly with the Milwaukee Historical Society, and just I guess outlining sort of the society as a whole, and then also just own experience with it over the last 20 years,
okay.
And just if there's things that I've noticed about the kind of topics that people are interested in, and the things that you both are and aren't able to provide for them.
Okay. Well, I guess first I could start to give you a little background on the history of the Milwaukee County Historical Society. It was founded in 1935 by 4 concerned citizens of Milwaukee who felt that it was horrible that a city the size of Milwaukee didn't have its own historical society by 1935. They had visited other cities that had historical societies that were in operation for a lot longer and couldn't understand why we didn't have one here, so they incorporated and formed a nonprofit organization, and it's because of those 4 people that Milwaukee has what it has today in the form of collections and artifacts and mementos of the past. So that, like I said, that was the foundation. It's a small organization, and much like a lot of nonprofits today, money is always an issue. It always will be an issue because we're funded by what we can raise, what people donate, bequests, donations, things like that. So it's a struggle all the time to make ends meet, so to speak. But luckily, we've always had people that have been interested enough in Milwaukee history to leave us money or donate money on a regular basis so that we have the funds to continue. Basically, the foundation, if you will, of the collections at the society started from this early beginnings. There used to be an old group in Milwaukee called the Old Settlers Club, and as their members died off and the membership got older and older, they recognized the need to pass on these things that they'd been collecting ever since Milwaukee had been founded. And these things go back to the 1830s, the very beginnings of Milwaukee, and they started collecting this material, and when they knew that they couldn't hang on to it anymore, they donated it to these 4 individuals that created the Historical Society. So that's kind of the foundation of our collections, and it's great materials that ranges everything from dance cards to ballroom programs, menus, flyers, flags, uniforms, things like that they've collected over the years that this Old Settlers Club had collected. And then more recently, in the 1960s, we became the official repository for Milwaukee County records. So every time Milwaukee County doesn't want to store something anymore, they give us a call and say, would you like to take 5,000 boxes of divorce records? And usually we do, because a big part of our clientele, our customer base, if you will, is genealogists, people doing family history, local history, that type of thing. So those are the kind of records that people are interested in. I mean, we have virtually anything you could think of, everything from city directories to maps to divorce records, coroner's inquests, probate files, personal manuscript collections, photographs. We have probably one of the finest photo collections anywhere. People always ask me, well, how many photos do you think you have? We never tried to count them, but I'm sure it's over 1 million photos in the collection. And it ranges all the way back from the very beginnings of Milwaukee up to the present day.
Yeah, a lot of interesting points in there. I guess one thing is But do you think there was a reason why there wasn't Milwaukee Historical Society as early as in some other communities? Was it just a matter of inertia or specific factors or obstacles that encountered here?
Yeah, my guess is that because there was this Old Settlers Club, people thought, well, if the Old Settlers Club is collecting it, then why do we need to create another institution, another organization to do basically what they were doing? But unfortunately, the Old Settlers Club wasn't in the business, if you will, of displaying these objects. They collected it, but they didn't have space to exhibit what they had collected. So they just had all these rooms and boxes full of material, but no place to put it out, so to speak, other than just their clubhouse, you know. And you had to be a member to get into the clubhouse, so it's a very select audience that got to view the materials that they had. So I think that's probably a big part of the reason why there wasn't something that happened before 1935. And I think, excuse me, the writing was on the wall when the Old Settlers were dying off. I mean, you can imagine from late 1800s to 1935, the membership had to be pretty old. I mean, it was dying away, and you had to be an original settler or a son or daughter of an original settler to be a member of the Old Settlers Club. Well, sooner or later, that club's going to die out. It just is by the factors of age.
So I guess you touched on part of this before, but would you describe as the overall role or mission for the society in terms of what it in terms of seeks to provide? I mean, with connection to the past of it, but I guess is there a more specific dimension to that?
It's a pretty simple mission statement, if you will. It's to preserve, protect, and exhibit Milwaukee County history. That's our mission statement in a nutshell. So we try to take anything and everything that pertains to Milwaukee County, and we make an effort to present it either through exhibits in our building or exhibits off-site or somewhere else, online, whatever, to highlight Milwaukee County's rich history. And so it's a pretty simple mission, if you will, to just try to disseminate that knowledge that we've collected inside the four walls to make it available to researchers, students, writers, film producers, whatever. I mean, we get a broad range of people coming in there looking at the type of stuff that we have.
Who or what decides what goes to your society or to Madison or Milwaukee, for example? Milwaukee has all the civil rights stuff. Mm-hmm. Why not?
Well, I think a large part of that is personal preference. So if you're a donor and let's say you have a body of materials that your grandfather collected and you want to donate it, if you have a stronger affection or affinity for the Milwaukee County Historical Society, if we look at the materials and view it as relevant to what we collect, then we would take it. If we look at it and say, really this belongs or it's better suited to be in Madison or UWM or military museum, whatever it might be, if it's better suited to be somebody else, we try to make that determination at that point, because we want everybody to be happy with what they did with their materials. There's nothing worse than to have an unhappy donor or a donor's family after they donated something and then they realize, wow, I should have given that to the Veterans Museum in Madison, because it's a legal process. When they sign over the rights to this material, it becomes the property of the County Historical Society. And I can tell you, in the close to 20 years that I've worked there, very, very few times, maybe on one hand, I can count the number of things that were ever given back by somebody who was disgruntled over how it came to us, or some family member or something like that. Because we take that responsibility very seriously, that once they sign it over, it's our property. And if we started giving back things, like somebody comes in a generation or two after the fact and says, well, my grandfather or great-grandfather gave this to you, I'd like to have it now. If we just started giving things back, there wouldn't be anything in the collection. Because everybody has second thoughts. Or family members have second thoughts. So.
What's the most common thing that you get donated to you?
Well, that's a good question. I would say photographs. I think photos are something that virtually everybody has in their household, and right or wrong, everybody thinks what they have is great, and so they always want to donate it to you. But it's always a matter, we can't take virtually everything people donate, so we have to be discriminatory in the sense that we look at it and we decide what we think fits best with the collections. Because no offense to a lot of people, but not everything is historical. Just because it's 50 years old doesn't make it historical, and that's hard to convince people of that.
So what's the oddest thing that you were ever donated?
Boy, okay. I hope this guy isn't listening because we haven't. A gentleman donated what he called, this is his terminology, not mine, he called it a witch board. And the best way I can describe it to you, it's somewhat similar to a Ouija board, but much simpler than a Ouija board. And he claimed, this is his words, not mine, he claimed that when they took this out of the house that it was in, a spirit of a dead child came up through this witch board, and that made it a good thing.
Interesting.
Now, you might ask us, why did you take that, and are you ever going to put it on display? I don't know. We have to, first of all, we have to verify, is there really such a thing as a witch board, or was this guy, is this something out of his mind, his fantasies, or whatever? So far, I've never been able to find any evidence there is such a thing as a witch board. And he said, he told me when he donated it, he said that it was a good witch board. And I said, well, what makes it a good witch board versus an evil one? And he said, because the stars are pointing up instead of down. And I said, but if you turn the board this way, the stars point. And he got very offended at that. So.
Oh, sure, and sure, no one likes being questioned in their methodology. And through it. Yeah. Yes. Sort of related to that. In terms of dealing with the people who donations and to then come to you with like sort of questions of like family background. I mean, are there ways that you found navigating kind of or trying to track in terms of genealogies and family history becomes different than kind of most kind of history that in terms of like I said the conventional or cliched like history is like the big scale events that happened or the large scale structures that happened. I mean, are there things that are more just sort of interesting or tenuous or alternatively like rewarding in presenting that?
Well, it's my own personal opinion, and you guys may disagree with me, or other people out there might disagree with me, but I feel that local history, in some ways, is more defining of who we are than, say, national, U.S., international history. That's my opinion. Because I think what we do at this level impacts the nation, and what impacts the nation then impacts the world. And so I think local history has a big role to play in that. And so, what you're saying basically is if my grandfather wrote this series of letters, let's say he was a doughboy in World War I and he donates something like that to the society, some people may look at that and say, well, they're just boring letters from a soldier at the front. But if you read those letters and maybe read through the lines a little bit, some of those stories and things that person has given us is a real window, if you will, into that time period, and their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions. That's why whenever we get diaries, to me, that's a gold mine, because the diaries, usually those are people's innermost thoughts, and we have some really great ones in the collection where even prominent people in Milwaukee are putting down things on paper that, if it would have become common knowledge, would have been very controversial, let's say, or would not have been well received by their peers, people of even stature and stuff, because sometimes they make comments about people of lower classes or even people of their same or upper classes. So you get some of those views, if you will, of history. So like I say, I think local history has so many ways it can impact us, and so many ways that researchers, students, whatever, can view this material, and it really tells a story that's so different than just sitting down and reading a history book or seeing a special on the History Channel, something like that. And no offense, the History Channel and some of those productions, they get their material from us, because I've had people from the History Channel, A&E, Discovery coming after materials that are in our collection to help supplement programs that they're putting on. So
it almost sounds like at the grade school level, the students' first sort of connections with history should be the local history. We should be coming to you, it seems, to start them off on that. That journey of history, the understand locality, and then broader and broader and broader.
And honestly, if it was brought up, taught, whatever you want to say, to younger generations, hopefully as they would mature, they would be of the same mindset where they would collect this material and not discard it. You know, because so many people throw out things that they think, oh, nobody's going to ever care about this, or this isn't important. But it's amazing how many people come in there, and it may look like something very trivial or of no consequence to me, but sometimes that one little piece of information is what they've been searching for 15, 20, 30 years, whatever.
And that brings up an interesting thing. As graduate students in history, we're always concerned about narratives being contrived or narratives being formed because of a selection of material that someone else has made. Mm-hmm. Even the archivist, like yourself, you're making choices about what gets accepted
right.
and what doesn't, based on probably politics, money, things like that. In one sense, you're helping to define or shape the narrative, right?
Right. And that's probably the hardest part of the job, because people ask that question all the time. Who decides what is taken and what isn't taken? And the only thing I can tell you there is each curator, whether it's a curator of artifacts, something three-dimensional, or somebody like me who's a curator of paper materials, something like photographs, books, documents, things like that. You're always looking at it, and the guidelines I go by is the material I'm looking at, regardless of my personal preferences, will it mean or will it be valuable to somebody in the future for research, exhibits, or just displays? I mean, does it have some sort of merit? That has to be the criteria why we keep it, because we don't have a building to store everything.
And sometimes whether or not something can be valuable historically doesn't get developed until much later on.
Right.
Which is, so some things can get lost.
For example, county executive records. Milwaukee has had a county executive system since the 1960s, and we've been fortunate that every county executive that held that office has donated his personal files to us. Those have not been accessed by researchers as of yet, because I think the 1960s in some ways is too current for some people. They're more interested in the older stuff, but as time goes on, I think those records will become more and more valuable, because it'll give researchers, students, writers, whatever, a real snapshot into what was going on in Milwaukee in the crucial decades of, like, say, the 1960s, 70s, that type of thing.
But I mean, even like things like car keys. You get some car keys. Well, who can get anything from this? But 20 years from now, there might be a whole school of interpreting car keys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you were there for the Joe Austin's.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, it was really, they just you can in some cases tell and make some effective judgments individually and collectively, like a patient of it, but just what happened in possession. So, which I guess then thinking as a model of history becomes interesting, because I mean in practice it does seem that we begin at the kind of most general, most overview presentation of world history. Then at college level we'll be doing a survey course generally on either pre or post 1877 US or pre or post 1500 in terms of for world history or Western civilization. And then later on, if people are more interested, they then might get into specialized areas or focus on locality or the dynamics within a single country, or even more rewardingly probably a region of country, which I don't know, it seems it's certainly useful to be. I think there's reasons that we do it in that way, partly because creating market at different kinds of levels for people to do in generalities, and I guess the idea of history as a project that allows you to have a common reference pool with others, but the trade-off for that is that you're always sacrificing real comprehension.
Isn't another thing that's going on here is, if you're dealing with local history, you're starting more with the concrete. The bigger you go, the more abstract, which would go along with how an individual develops their reasoning skills. Just wondering if that is a different model that could be legitimate.
Potentially. I mean, I think it depends how you're doing both run-through of history, and I think often And I would say even within the limitations of time and overly generic run through, there's ways of doing it that's less abstract, that is still connecting with some cases you think are the relevant details, the revelatory details that run through. Likewise, there's probably ways to do local history that is also detached from concrete meaning and does become still too much kind of gloss over a lot of different periods. But yeah, I mean, well, in any case, you can't look at the records and archives and primary sources and weigh different types of it becomes most useful. So I guess returning another point maybe before Steve, or actually a couple of things in terms of Randy, you asked directly about politics of it. Steve, you mentioned in terms of some of the statements and judgments based on like class nature. I mean, also does that come up in terms of in the presentation of Milwaukee? I mean, I would imagine that like if people with like family histories are in some extent interested in finding continuities and finding background and finding what people that related to them or that they were in their larger sphere were doing, but also what about like I guess discontinuities, the struggles, the labor struggles, and in some cases overt violence involved both in with labor, with unionization, with the Victor Berger, with as you said before, civil rights. Is that something that comes up prominently in terms of what people are interested in, or is it something that you work in? Yeah,
absolutely. People are always, we get a wide range of people. Some people have, I'm going to be delicate here, they have historical knowledge, and then other people have no national, international historical knowledge at all. They come in and they're strictly after their family stuff. And sometimes you have to explain to them that the reason why they can't find, let's say, their uncle's saloon in 1927 is because Prohibition happened. And sometimes you have to explain Prohibition to them. So sometimes there's a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding of national or international events. That's why you can't find what you need. But people are always interested. I mean, it's a common thread. What was Milwaukee like, say, in 1920, 1910, 1900, whatever? They want to know what the average, unfortunately, a lot of the stuff we have has been saved by, let's say, middle to upper class people because they have the time and the energy to come home after a day at work and maybe do a diary or keep something on file of their life or their experiences, whereas no offense, the working class guy, labor or something like that, he probably worked so hard during the day, the last thing on his mind was going home and writing down a diary of his day-to-day events.
Yeah, it's a classic problem with sources. Right?
But there are those bits and pieces that show up, either if it is a middle class or an upper class person who does document something, because sometimes they make those comments about the other people that they run into and they experience, and so those are and true. You have to weigh everything somebody says with a kind of what they say a grain of salt, because there is a bias there. Everybody has a bias no matter what, and so you have to weigh what they're saying because they may be negatively influenced or negatively view some racial group or something like that, and the comments they make, you have to kind of weigh that with the time period and their educational background and their upbringing and things like that. But it is a very common thread that people always want to know what was just the flavor, the atmosphere in Milwaukee at a certain time period. Whether it's a film producer that wants to do a very realistic scene of something, we have playwrights who come in and want to know, okay, I'm writing this play about Milwaukee in 1870. What kind of background material am I going to need to know? What would that person be doing? How would they act? What would be the customs? Those type of things. So, there's a wealth of material out there that helps document that, whether it's magazines of the time period, diaries, personal reminiscences. There's all sorts of sources that you can use to kind of at least give them an idea of what that time period might have been like. And that's just part of it. That's part of the research. That's part of the fun of digging for this information.
The politics part is interesting in that, Jacob, you're familiar with the UWM's whole thing on civil rights, that whole big thing that they're putting together, putting it online. And there are very famous people who their records are in there who won't allow certain records out because there's some very bad things they said about certain groups of people. People who would be damaged to know that they had used this language or said these sorts of things
Absolutely.
in the middle of civil rights.
Absolutely.
So,
And as an archivist, we have certain collections where there are files in the collection that are restricted because the donor has put a time period on some of these records, and they might say, I don't want these records released to the general public until 50 years after my death or something like that, So we have to deal with that kind of stuff too.
just like JFK.
Yeah, it's kind of how tantalizing. What could be in there, but even in some cases when history proves the potential to be still embarrassing or politically significant now, it does seem that it validates the profession more so. If anything that can be contested and have an impact on people with power now of it, it does. I don't know, I guess make it not. I don't think historians will ever be accused of being too edgy of a profession in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis. But there is that dimension that can be run with. I guess also with since it said before, in times have to give a kind of just the larger context to people who don't have as much knowledge of even sort of widespread things. So in that sense of if you're giving trying to set the stages for, as I said before, Milwaukee during the 1960s, and you need to give someone the elevator level of speech just to set out a piece of evidence. How do you do that generally, or what's kind of the narrative or themes that you hit?
Well, if we're going to use that as an example, let's say the civil rights era of Milwaukee in the 1960s. You have to, with any customer, patron of the library, the research library, you have to be delicate. You don't want to appear like you're trying to lecture them or preach to them or something, but I just try to give some background. Maybe you didn't know that Milwaukee was experiencing these growing pains or these issues going on, much like the rest of the nation. There were civil rights demonstrations, there was housing marches, there were burnings and things going on in other parts of the country. Milwaukee was no different than those other cities. As any major cities, we have ethnic groups that don't always agree with what's going on with what the status quo is, and I said, much like any other city, we have to deal with that, and sometimes there's violence, sometimes there's protests and that type of thing. So it's just basically a kind of a friendly, not too many facts, not too many figures, just mini history lesson, if you will, in a brief way to try to give them some background so that they understand why they maybe can't find what they're looking for, or if they're finding something that they had no idea their relative ancestor would be involved in, why would they be marching in a housing march? What does that mean? Well, then you explain to them that during these periods, the NAACP and the various African American groups that were in Milwaukee at that time, the Youth Congress and stuff like that, they were making these marches to try to demonstrate to get fair housing for African Americans, and there was a Catholic priest, Father Grappi, who was leading these marches and things like that. So you kind of give them a little mini Milwaukee history lesson, if you will, to kind of bring them up to speed. Much like World War II or World War I, it's amazing how many people don't know that we fought in some. They know World War II, but World War I, there's an audience out there that has no idea that we fought in World War I, because they find pictures of their relatives in these uniforms and they're like, well, I didn't even know he served, but what was he doing? What was the United States doing during that time period? So, we take it for granted as historians that everybody ought to know that, the United States entered the war and we fought and so forth, but not everybody views history the same way we do, so you have to be diplomatic and constructive and considerate of people and try to educate them, and that way it provides even more of a story for them to tell their relatives and their ancestors about why Grandpa is dressed in this crazy uniform and he came back complaining of being gassed or whatever, those type of things. But that's what's fun. That's what's fun about the job. You never know what kind of question's going to come in, who's going to bring it up. Some things are embarrassing, some things are funny, some things are sad. I mean, there's a wide range of emotions that go on. I mean, it's not unusual for me to see somebody crying because they find something they've been looking for so long and so emotional about finding it. Some people laugh about Grandpa was arrested for the 15th time for drunken disorderly, things like that, you know. Sometimes it kind of paints a clearer picture of the family that maybe they had an idea that maybe some of these things were going on, but now they have concrete evidence once they see a jail record that Grandpa was kind of like the town drunk or whatever. You know? He was being brought in every Saturday night.
Now I understand my parents. Right.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many people find out that their, say, grandparents were married once, twice, 3 times, and they had no idea.
Wow.
You know, they always thought they were married to the grandmother that they knew, but when you look in some of the records, you find out they had another wife before that, and they weren't very nice to that other wife. They divorced them because they were beating the other wife, things like that. So, I mean, that's what some of those records provide. So that's what's fun about it. It's history, but history in a different sense, if you will. It's not just facts and figures of a national origin or a national importance. It's you know, everyday people, what was going on with them, what makes them tick, why they're important to all of us.
Are some of your archives searchable online?
We're working more and more to try to do that. You know, it's a slow process because we have so many records and so few staff, and like we talked about earlier, we do have volunteers and interns from UWM, Marquette, other schools, but little by little we're trying to make headway on some of that stuff as technology will permit us and as time will permit us, things like that. But yeah, unfortunately a lot of it will probably be the old-fashioned way of just going in and digging through books, ledgers, papers, you know, that type of thing, because there's just so much. It'd be very difficult to try to scan it all and make it available online, that type of thing.
Is there a typical demographic for people that come in as you know, to try to find out specific things in terms of age, gender, race, class? I mean, I'm sure some variety of, is there, you know, in terms of some generalizations, like most of the type of people who come to you to try to seek
I would
services?
say if I had to paint a broad picture of genealogists, I would say probably predominantly Caucasian. I would say in the age group 45 and on up. Not to say that there aren't some younger ones and other ethnic groups and so forth interested, but I would have to say that's predominantly what I see, at least with the collections that we have. I would say for certain subjects, though, we get probably predominantly students. It seems like every fall, UWM's architecture school sends its architecture students out looking for buildings to research, and we get a flood of architecture students looking at our great materials we have on various historic buildings in Milwaukee.
Interesting.
So pretty much every fall you can plan on architecture students. Usually in the spring I can count on Marquette journalism students. You know, so you can kind of plan your seasons based on what school and who's coming in. But, you know, there's always, you know, occasional film people trying to do a documentary, put together an advertising campaign. They want to use old, you know, old images are hot now. When I first started the Historical Society in '93, we got a few requests for that type of thing. Maybe every once in a while an old annual report cover or something would have an old historic photo on some company in Milwaukee that was over 100 years old, but not a whole lot. But boy, lately, you know, Ken Burns comes along, and all of a sudden, old is cool, and everybody wants it, and it became this thing where now all the images, anything that's old Milwaukee is valuable, you know, valuable to somebody for some reason. So yeah, it's. But like I say, we get a mix. I would say probably 75% of our customers are probably genealogists. I would say 15 to 20 is probably students, and the other ones are either professors coming up with projects for students, or writers, or film, TV people, that type of stuff. And there's an occasional just casual user that has no interest in anything. They're just curious to see what we have. They come in and say, yeah, I don't really have anything in mind. I just was interested in what you guys might have here, so they kind of browse and see what they can see that might pique their curiosity.
Yeah, I think the fact that most, although not all, people interested in genealogy and family ties, come around like you say over 45. It's just kind of interesting to think about how people, broadly integrate history at different parts of life, or even the fact that even in terms of thinking own interaction and when family became more interested in like going through the journals that they had. Yeah, I mean, it's I guess probably not generally likely to be views of it, or people in their 20s who are more interested in it, but I guess at a certain point, there'd be more interest in trying to reconstruct origins. And
yeah. I think that's a fact of as we grow older, you become more interested in where you've been versus where you're going. When you're 20 years old, you're looking ahead. When you're 55, 60, 70, you're looking back because you're trying to relive some of that stuff. So I think that's how it works with family genealogy. You've got the 20-somethings that, it's kind of cool that maybe their grandfather or great-grandfather or something was in a war, but that's about all they really care to know about it. It's only when they get older and maybe they go through a war experience or a military something or other, and that's when they get interested in researching their family. And that seems to be pretty common thread through most of the genealogists that I've worked with. They all say they got into it later in life as they had their families, had their kids, their career is going, or they've retired and they're looking for something to do. And what better way to spend your time in trying to see what Grandpa was all about, or where did I come from, or why did my family even come to Milwaukee in the first place, and sometimes you can find that through some of the records, it's there in black and white why they came here. So, it's...
Yeah, it seems intriguing as a way of presenting social history of people experiencing life and being motivated now, because it means that in practice you might be feel much more connected with your past beyond the people you directly knew, more connected, and you're just even aware of legacy of grandparents and great grandparents and origins later in life, so that earlier it just might not be something that has much sort of influence, that even in some cases connections that could be pretty dramatic or could suggest certain affinities or lessons or things in the past to either honor or to try to rebel against in some cases just aren't necessarily factoring into the conversation unless your parents become interested at that point and are dragging, in terms of that case, sort of kids along for the personal ride, which I don't know. It again suggests that I think most people's connection with the past isn't necessarily organic most of the time, and does come to be imposed on them for much of a lifetime. Unless an academic subset or are relying on other mediums that like as we talked about before, some of the Hollywood presentation of the past that uses historical tropes, etc., but in much more dramatic, glamorized fashion.
Yeah. So, it becomes pretty apparent the people that come in that are there because they have an assignment to do and they've got to get it done quickly because the deadline's coming up, and then the people that are there because they genuinely like history and they genuinely like the topic and they're really enthusiastic about it. It's very apparent when they're doing the research which ones are which. and the kind of materials they pick too. I mean, some are just looking for that quick fact and okay, this will help me write my paper, okay, I'll see you later, and that's probably the last you'll ever see them in a historical society.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think so many conversations that we've had now on the show about the role of the historian and the role of history and teaching it, and it seems like the big disconnect is that we are at the college level and the high school level, we are expected to do something that people won't naturally be interested in until much later in life. Somehow we have to teach history that someone in their 40s will love to someone in their 20s or even their teens.
Yeah.
That's I think one of our big rubs.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a lack of feels like immediate relevance or organic connection to the things that are issues that are relevant and brought in with day-to-day life, then history becomes experienced as either just a collection of facts and information, or as a coercion process. That in learning to do history, what you learn to do is to write the paper and find and figure out how to navigate and where to go and find the information, where to look at the other books, look it up, and analyze, etc. But are not necessarily connecting more, which does feel becomes a larger issue. I guess the other thing is, have you noticed anything within the last 10 years, a difference in terms of particularly with students or people interested, based on, I guess, the impact of the online medium for at least some of the easy fact checking, or does that change the numbers of people that returned, or the way that they ask you, or the way that they expect
Absolutely.
to find?
The internet has dramatically, when I first started there, this is going to sound horrible, people are probably cringe, but when I first started there, we had one laptop in the library. That was our computer, and it was a green screen Zenith, and it was pretty crude even by that time period standards in 1993, and virtually most of the stuff we had was either typed in some sort of typewritten fashion or on card catalogs or something like that. And when people would call or come in, we'd go and we'd check these various indexes to see what we might have, and that's how we found out about things. As time has gone on, we obviously got more computers, we got more help to move some of this stuff over from its traditional format into something that's more easily searched, either through a database or something like that. And now the questions that come in, we developed a website and everything else. Now the questions come in and they want immediate answers. They expect it. When they write you a question, can you tell me whether or not you have any pictures of 1222 Center Street? They want to know now. They don't want you to give them an answer like, well, you need to come in and check through the file and we'll be able to help you then. They want, before they even make a trip down, they want to know if it's going to be worth it. So it's changed the way, at least our library, it's changed the way our library works, because before it was always in-person work being done. Now a lot of it's being done over the internet through questions and things like that. It does take up more of your time. Your day is spent more with those kind of things, and so that creates another problem that you're not getting other work done that you should be working on, because like I said, we're a very small staff and have volunteers and stuff, but when you're spending part of your day on the phone or on the internet, it definitely cuts down on your work that you're getting done in other ways. So the internet has dramatically changed the way we do things, and people's questions, like you said, their level of expectations is that it should be instantaneous or near instantaneous, and that's not always possible. There's certain collections that it would be impossible. I say that, but there'll probably be somebody say, oh, well, it can be done. But at least at this time, it'd be impossible to make it searchable, that we could go and just type something in and it would tell us whether or not something was there. Some of it you just have to do the old-fashioned way. You go in and you search through file after file, ledger after ledger to try to find something. And it's very time-consuming, and that's why some days I don't get very far on research requests. I might get 2 or 3 done in a day, because some of them are really involved and they take a lot of time. And people sometimes they're accepting of that, sometimes they're not. They're like, well, why don't you have this all on computer? And I usually kind of joke back with them, well, why don't you come down and volunteer and help us put it on a computer? Because it's easy to sit back and say, how come it isn't there? But until you actually try to do it, it's a little tougher.
So what do you think of the future of the society in terms of, I guess probably online businesses and perhaps more broadly some of the economic situation that seems to suggest nonprofits will be among somewhat more deprived of funding long terms. Are there serious questions of it, or do you become still optimistic?
Yeah, to me, I'm just basing this on my own personal experience. I think there'll always be those people that value what we do, what we have, what we exist for, and I think they'll help support us and keep us going. Will we ever be flush with money, so flush that we can just go out and spend $1 million on something? I don't know about that, but I think we do a good job with the amount of resources that we have, and I think maybe by some stroke of luck, maybe some benefactor will leave us a huge sum of money, and that'll make things even more comfortable. But I think we'll always struggle. And I think, you know, when I look at all the historical societies across Wisconsin, there's a lot of them that are having really tough times right now because of the economy. There's some that have folded since, you know, the economy took a dive several years ago. I think we're fortunate. We're still riding above the surface, not below the surface.
So are you sort of on a funding model, sort of like a library? Is that how you would fit in?
We're a nonprofit, a 501c3, which basically means, you know, we exist.
But you get public funding.
The only thing we get publicly, it's kind of a weird relationship, and this was done back in the 1960s, as I kind of talked about early on. When the county made us their official repository for records, they decided, since they were dumping all these records on us, that they would give us some funding to help store these records, because it takes a warehouse to store. I mean, right now we have probably approaching 20,000 boxes of just divorce cases. And I've got another 10,000 coming not too long from now. So I mean, certain records are increasing at a rate that we are going to have to keep having warehouse space for. So I mean, I think, you know, as time goes on, those issues are always going to be with us, and we'll just have to deal with it. But you know, the county does provide some funding to help support that storage, and the building that we're in, the old bank building that we're in, was given, if you will, to the county for us as a home. That was the way the agreement was drawn up. First Wisconsin owned the building. They said if we wanted it for a home for the Historical Society, they would give it to the county in trust for us. If at some point we don't want the building anymore, then it would have to be decided who gets the building after that. So the property is kind of a county property, but technically we live there.
So do you like at a state fair, do you go set up a booth and try to bring attention or money?
At various events, you know, outreach programs, things like that, absolutely. We're always trying to draw attention to what we do. You know, at different times I've gone out, different staff members have gone out to try to promote us and try to tell people what we do and encourage them to either donate material to us or donate money to us, whatever. You know, when I talk to some of these various groups like ethnic groups and genealogical societies and things like that, I definitely encourage them, if you don't want to donate any money to us, at least donate some of your records and that type of thing. So we're always looking for, you know, an infusion of either materials or funds. I mean, it's just part of who we are and what we need to do in order to survive. You know, and that's why we charge certain fees for things that we do. Like if we make a copy of a photograph, we charge you a fee for it. If we make a copy of a piece of paper, we charge you a copy fee.
Do you take members? Do you have memberships?
Absolutely. There's a membership, so that helps support the organization. Honestly, though, what the membership costs you and gives us is very little goes to help support the society in that sense. But it's just knowing that you have those people you can count on for support in the future. You become our mailing list of people we call upon if we have an event coming up and we want you to come see the new exhibit, or if we're at the end of the year, we do an end of the year appeal where we ask for funds, that type of thing.
So you do exhibits like an art museum?
Yeah, we do exhibits on various topics. You know, it just depends what the curatorial staff has decided we're going to exhibit that particular period of time. Usually we try to change them up every...
Can you give us a few examples, like
of different exhibits we've had in the past? Oh, geez.
Just one or two.
We've done things on socialism in Milwaukee. I mean, Milwaukee's a huge hotbed of socialism.
That was my next question.
We've done. We'd like to do a better one, though. That's one of my goals, is to do a better one on socialism. We've done things on brewing. We've done things on baseball, Civil War, Milwaukee's role in the Civil War, Milwaukee's role in World War I, World War II. Grocery stores in Milwaukee. I mean, you know, just a wide variety of different things. We're going to try to, you know, one of our goals is maybe try to do a series on neighborhoods in Milwaukee. so we could highlight different neighborhoods in Milwaukee, tell you what their makeup was, what kind of groups came there, what kind of housing they put up, that kind of thing.
That sounds great. What are the membership fees?
I think right now for an individual it's $40. For a family it's $75.
This is for a year?
Yeah, that's a yearly. So if, let's say you would join today, it goes till that that part of the calendar next year. And it helps support the society. You get a magazine, you get the newsletter, you get 10% off of book purchases. We publish a lot of local Milwaukee history books.
Do you have a publishing arm?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with John Gerda's book, The Making of Milwaukee.
Yeah.
That was published through us.
Do you write some of the articles?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I've done a couple in our magazine, our history magazine. I'd like to do some more. Unfortunately, my time is kind of spent with some other stuff in the society. But yeah, I'd like to do some more. Maybe when I retire or something, I'd like to pull out some articles. Because you see things after work, and there you see things you store it away and say, boy, I'd like to do a story on that someday. Because you can't help but one of the perks, if you will, of the job is you get to see all this stuff. So you can't help but notice certain things that you really pique your interest, and you're like, boy, I'm going to catalog that away. I'm going to write something about that someday. So yeah.
Well, it sounds pretty neat.
Very interesting. And I guess, coming to the end of it, but I guess one other perhaps slightly morbid question with this, but when the historical societies close, as you say, several of them have in the last few years, where do their records go?
I think the way the system works, overall the State Historical Society of Wisconsin is kind of the overreaching arm of all historical societies in the state. So I think if somebody would close down, they would step in and try to take the records, or at least safeguard the records until they could either resurrect the society or bring it to them in Madison. I don't think they just suddenly disappear or they're handed out to former members or anything. I don't think it's that way. But the State Historical Society, I think, tries to look out for those kind of things. But there have been, unfortunately, like I say, there have been some societies that have closed in the past few years because of the poor economics of what's going on. And it's a reality of any nonprofit. I don't care, historical societies or social service agencies or whatever, they're all facing money problems. You have to generate enough money to keep the doors open and support yourself. And as more organization exists, it becomes more of a struggle. So, there's only so much money to spread around, and you try to compete for all that money. So.
Sure.
And this is Wisconsin now, so probably going to get worse before it gets better. I'm contractually obligated to end each radio show with a point of pessimism and general cynicism towards the future, and hopefully a dig at Scott Walker, where possible, But I guess any other closing thoughts?
Well, I think this was a great forum to give you a little background on the Historical Society, and I hope I've...
What's your web address?
It's www.milwaukeehistory.net. N-E-T. Yep.
Very good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, felt learned a lot.
Become a member.
So leave us some money.
Thank you both for coming in and talking with us. Thanks to all the viewers for listening the past hour. Then encourage you to stay tuned if interested in catching the Killer Radio Show that will be starting in just a few minutes. And of course, can tune in next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m., where myself, Jason Kennedy, and John Terry will be talking about counterculture science fiction of the 1960s and connection with some of political radicalism that's happening then. I'd also encourage you to check out John Terry's other show on Monday evenings at 10 p.m., Say It Loud, Random Slabs in Music History. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Straight into that with that.